You're listening to Experience Imagination, a themed entertainment design podcast presented by Falcon's Creative Group. Every episode, we discuss a new topic with a panel of creative professionals. Hi, I'm Cecil McPuri, President and Chief Creative Officer of Falcons.
Hi everybody, welcome back to Experience Imagination. Today we are talking about the ever-evolving technology of XR, which used to be referred to as AR, VR, MR. All of that is now collectively classified as XR. And to talk to us about this very interesting topic, we are fortunate enough to sit down with some of our best tech heads here at the studio. And later in the episode, we will also be joined by special guest Charlie Fink, who is a leading voice in the XR discussion. Let's go ahead and start with our conversation with Jason, Saham, and David. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Jason Ambler. I'm the Vice President of Digital Media here at Falcons.
Hi, I'm David Consolo. I'm the Senior Interactive Designer here at Falcons.
Hi, I'm Saham Ali, and I'm the Director of Technology for Falcons.
Thank you so much for joining me. We are here to talk about XR experiences. And right off the bat, I want to say that I have been in several meetings discussing the topic or topics similar, and I still don't think that I have a confident understanding of what exactly XR is or how we define it, especially since I know it's ever evolving in some ways. So could we spend just a few moments talking a little bit about what XR means to you? Saham?
Sure, yeah. So I think in the early days, we were defining augmented / mixed / virtual reality as three very different types of mediums. As we've now kind of evolved and learned a little bit about the use cases, I think the industry's kind of placed a moniker on top of all three of these technologies or implementations as XR. I think it's extended realities, which kind of covers both the virtual, the augmented, the mixed.
Cool.
Yeah, XR is kind of the umbrella term that houses all these other forms of reality. So it's more of a way to group all of these different technologies because in some ways they are kind of in the same realm.
Is there an example that comes to mind? What excites you the most when you think about how the field is changing with XR right now?
So, XR is a fairly new term, and when we're talking about how that can manifest itself, one of the things that ultimately is very exciting is the idea of, frictionless experiences. You don't have to put something on. It becomes a little bit more intuitive.
And it's allowed the experience to move away from an individual experience to a group experience.
Right. That's a great point. Frictionless is a really interesting way of describing it because it really is, it does feel a little bit like you're removing obstacles and you're increasing momentum. And to that point, Saham, the idea of some of these amazing devices that we have to put on in order to experience these things, once those devices start to no longer be necessary, you reconnect with the person that's sitting next to you or standing next to you, and you get that community aspect back in. David, I know that you spend a lot of time in our studio doing a lot of R&D on these kinds of technologies, working with these other two guys. What's something that you're in particular that excites you about this growing technology?
When you're a consumer and you have a headset at home, you're expected to set up the room calibration, set up the base stations if that's the headset that you have. But on site, on an LBE system, such as a museum or an attraction, what we would like to do is keep that away from the guests and just go in as fast as possible to be able to put this experience
The moment
on.
they show up, it's already ready and waiting to go.
Ultimately, it comes down to the design of the experience and what's the best delivery format.
Sure.
And so, once you understand that you're trying to deliver something to a group, it right away becomes apparent that having to provide physical pieces of hardware to everybody and onboarding and getting everybody ready to use it.
The hygiene, accessibility.
It ends up becoming a big killer. And so adapting these experiences to not require hardware and, in a group setting where you're using almost a culmination of people's physical position and designing the optics so that, people aren't breaking the effect that they're actually seeing a window into another world. It just requires a little bit more finesse, but it's totally achievable now.
it can roll out in so many different ways in the industry. One of the most interesting to talk about is the idea of a local experience, an LBE experience. If you could create a dynamic, immersive world or narrative or experience that is different every time you go through it, changes in real time, I feel like that local venue is not just a spectacle one-time experience, it's a playground that you can keep coming back to over and over again.
And not even a different experience every time you ride, a different experience for every person.
Exactly.
That's concurrently using the space as well. So one person can have a completely different experience, but a shared space.
So because this is such a relatively new concept and it's always changing and evolving, I'm sure that there's a lot of interesting stories to be heard about what the process is like actually in creating and introducing an XR experience. What has that process been like for the team?
Well, there's many incarnations of what an XR experience can be.
Right.
Projection mapping is essentially an augmented reality experience. But projection mapping for Falcons has been around for a long time. Even doing dome content essentially is a form of virtual reality. Our first project with Battle for Ire, that the goal mainly was we want to put VR on this attraction. How do we do it, and how do we keep our capacity high? Similarly, when it comes to AR, we looked at different AR products in the market. We saw the power of augmented reality and what it could mean for location-based experiences, but knew that there was nothing out there really even close that would be self-contained and frictionless enough to apply to an LBE, which is why we developed our own Falcons Vision headset.
Yeah, what was the process involved in developing a new XR product like Falcons Vision?
There was a need for ease of access into the XR space for our guests. The benefit of Falcons Vision is all we have to ask from the user is to hold it in their hands and bring it up to their face.
Like binoculars.
Like binoculars. It's as easy as that. We don't have to have the guests actually strap anything on their heads. All they have to do is pick it up, look through it on their own pace.
Right.
It's easy and it's so natural.
Intuitive.
It's intuitive for users to know how to handle this headset. It mixes the real world with the virtual world, so you still see the real world behind it, and it's an additional, it's AR.
Could you talk a little bit about our most recent XR experiences that we've been involved with?
Yeah, so we've been involved in two recent ones. Jane Goodall experience in Washington, D.C. for National Geographic.
Becoming Jane, right.
Correct. And it's a very interesting, wonderful experience. We asked 3 users who come up, and they're able to actually use the Falcons Vision headset to be able to peer into the world of the chimpanzees and actually see a day in the life, and in the way that Jane Goodall herself was able to observe.
The thing that I love about that is the natural intuition of picking up a device and looking through it just so perfectly narratively emulates understanding the experience of what Jane was physically doing by lifting actual binoculars and peering into the chimpanzees' lives.
Yeah, there's lots of pictures of her doing that same thing.
Exactly.
That's how she studied chimpanzees a lot of times, was through binoculars, because they wouldn't get as close as you would imagine. So she had to look through binoculars to see these things.
And then you said that there was a second one?
Yeah, and then the second one is the Pacu AR experience in Brevard Zoo. And basically that allows multiple guests to view an AR experience with a leader kind of directing the experience. And you get to see the Pacu fish basically go through their life cycle and disperse the seeds that they eat, and the cycle that continues after that as the plants grow from the dispersed seeds. And you can get different vantage points, and that projection that the leader has, their tablet, they're actually able to track this view from their view to everyone else on a TV that's right above theirs.
So in both of those projects, you're looking at a physical space,
correct?
But you are free to move around it, and then through the device, you are seeing something.
Yeah,
from that perspective.
We're overlaying digital content in front of physical, real stuff.
Right.
And you have the ability to move effectively anywhere you want and see from any vantage point.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume that the reason for which approach you take versus which project goes back to what you were saying, Saham, about it just really depends on the needs of that particular experience, the narrative, and what the guest experience is like.
I think one of the challenges for the Pacu exhibit was it was an outdoor experience.
Oh,
and
right.
we were looking looking through an enclosure, right? We're looking at the exhibit through glass, and that kind of posed some challenges for optical-based tracking. So it led us into a direction of requiring something like the HTC tracking system. We had a lot more control in the Jane exhibit. We could make it however we wanted.
Right.
We could put art up on the wall. So we
It's
opted
more consistent, more reliable.
Exactly. And so we opted to use technologies that we know were proven. And even now, we are actively developing ulterior tracking technologies, full 6DoF, that don't even use either of those technologies, which are, in our head, even better. So it's ever evolving.
Frictionless.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I think it kind of just leads to the last question that I have for all of you. What is next? What are you most excited about coming in the future of XR?
One of the really exciting things that I'm always looking forward to would be things like 5G, wireless technologies that will allow us to have that almost Internet of Things at a very localized level, making it so that things that are really visually intense, now instead of having to have a computer in my headset or in Falcon's vision or anything, now the heavy lifting is done by something in a server room or in the cloud and beamed to my head with minimal amount of latencies and being physically accurate.
Nice.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing, and that's a trend going across the board as far as cloud computing and leveraging the power of cloud and something that's off-site and not weighing that down on your device or something that you can hold. All that becomes now is basically a piece of display technology, not the main source of computing.
Specifically for me, I love ease of access. In the future, these things are getting easier for people to be able to get into this world as quickly as possible and have an incredible experience that's different from the ones that they have at home.
Right. Absolutely.
Frictionless.
Frictionless. Exactly.
That's the key word.
I would also
everybody.
say, be available for everybody and to be accessible for everybody. This may be the first time people have ever engaged with XR. And so we have a responsibility to deliver on a very high quality, high bar so that they continue to be interested in the technology.
And it's only going to get better. As we've seen, the big players on the market are making strides towards developing the languages. And I'll give you an example of WebGL, WebVR, WebXR. These languages, or even AR Core, AR Kit that Google and Apple have been developing, are going to make it eventually you don't have to even download an app. You're literally just going to go to a website, and the website will bring you on into a AR and or VR and or mixed reality XR experience without having to download anything. Just run it right off your phone.
One of the secret sauces for me about immersion that I'm excited about, that I'm pushing for, is frame rate. I am obsessed with high frame rate. And so one of the things when we first developed Falcon's vision that we needed to have was high frame rate. Back in the day, it was only 60 FPS headsets. Now they're going to 90. Now they're going to 120. Now they're going to 144.
What is the human eye again?
More than 1,000, depending on
Okay. So we know our target goal.
right.
But obviously there's that, the degradation after you get to a certain point. But even, you think about most cinema and film is 24 frames per second. Just going up to 60 is almost 3 times jump. Now we're talking about going up to 120. That's exponential.
Keep watching in the very near future, but we are very excited about high frame rate and the effects of high frame rate on mixed reality experiences and XR experiences with a group of people, where imagine, if you will, you're able to achieve XR without a headset in a group setting, but everyone gets to see something unique.
Well, thank you guys again so much for joining me on this conversation. My mind is sufficiently blown, and I also now have a new appreciation of the word frictionless. So,
Glad to hear it.
It was fun,
man.
Cool. We'll go ahead and jump into our conversation with Charlie Fink now.
My name is Charlie Fink. I'm an XR consultant, a columnist. I'm a contributor to Forbes.com and a faculty member at Chapman University in Southern California.
Awesome. I think one look at your resume is enough to know you've worked with Disney, you've worked with AOL, you've touched theater, documentaries, animation. I would love to know how your journey has brought you to the world of XR, or was it always kind of a consistent thing that you were touching throughout your career?
I moved to technology while I was still at Disney in 1992. I jumped onto a Disney-owned project called Virtual World. And Virtual World was one of the first VR-cades. It was modified flight simulators networked together to make you feel like you were driving hovercraft on Mars and giant tanks and so forth. So that's where I was exposed to VR, and it turned me into a digital media executive and therefore attractive to AOL in 1995 when there was no such thing as a digital media executive.
You're inventing the title as you go.
Yes, exactly. So I was the proto model for that, but I was always on the consumer side. And I was on the consumer side when I was at AOL and when I was the president of AmericanGreetings.com and BlueMountain.com. When I left American Greetings, I had done well enough that I could really contemplate any kind of a pivot that I wanted, and I wanted to be back in entertainment. So I started to get involved with producing Broadway shows. I became the chairman of the New York New Musical Festival, but I tired of it because it was so hard and so much about raising money. So I did what I could do, which was I started writing. So I wrote about everything I knew about, movies, social media, technology, theater. And I got nothing but crickets, really, even when I wrote about Disney. But when I started to write about VR, suddenly, my first post about VR attracted probably 5 times the number of readers that all of my other stories combined had attracted over the course of a year. And in fact, so of course, that was a real dopamine hit for me.
Right.
So I said, well, I'm going to write more about virtual reality.
Charlie, I know you wrote a book called Metaverse, an AR-enhanced guide to VR and AR, which has been dubbed the Bible of AR and VR. So I'm sure it helps people who are not as familiar with the technology to understand what the medium is all about. But I'm very curious to know, how do you find the right words to explain what XR is to an uninitiated audience?
Everybody feels like, the pros have them outclassed. But, if you read and you study, as I do every day, and you have a Twitter feed, which is pretty focused. And, I study this stuff all day and all night. It's part of what I eat online, and I'm online a lot. So it allows me to explain it to myself and share with you that process. And that keeps it current. And as I said, authentic, which I think is the most important quality that media has to have today to be successful.
Well, I feel like, to everything that you just said, I feel like the concept of storytelling seems to be a huge theme in your work and your approach to this technology. I've read that you once called VR and AR the greatest business and technology story of our time. What did you mean by that?
What I compare this technology to the introduction of the personal computer. And that took 20 years. 20 years for 25% of American households to have a computer in it.
Right.
So I think VR, which has been around for maybe 10 years liberally, is on a similar trajectory. With regard to AR, I think mobile AR will continue to dominate. Yes, there will be glasses, but I think it's going to be more like Apple Watch. The truth is that we will have interoperable AR and VR devices. I'm not sure how much use the AR will be to us day to day, but I think VR will be very, very central in our lives. And you'll have a headset by your desk, and you'll jump in and out of VR to go to meetings or do other things, and it'll be normal. And it won't just be for games, although for games to be pretty good.
What excites you most about the possibilities of XR in the near future?
If you had asked me that question 12 months ago, I would have said to you, the problem VR is having right now is that nobody understands its value proposition. The key value proposition of virtual reality is presence. But you already have presence. No one thinks they need presence. No one buys something based on a need that I tell them they're supposed to have. But then we have this black swan event, and all of a sudden everybody is deprived of that very basic human right of being present.
Right.
And now nobody says to me, what is VR for, right? You need to be in a conference room, a virtual conference room, as if you were in a real conference room.
Right. There's a certain dimension there that is very hard to have not exist for you suddenly.
Yeah, so it's, the human condition has suddenly changed, which is not something that most businesses or even technologies can anticipate. No question. But the devices have to be cheap. They have to just work. I should emphasize that, right? I mean, the amount of friction that exists today is intolerable for most consumers.
Right. Yeah. I want to move into talking a little bit more about entertainment and the gaming space when it comes to virtual reality, when it comes to all of them.
It's doing great right now. People who have VR, who are quarantined, really like to play VR games.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, so there just aren't enough headsets out there right now. Sony and Oculus are trying to change that, but they can only make a couple million a year. So right now we're suffering from a shortage of devices, not a shortage of entertainment.
How do you feel like products like Falcon's Vision or different XR technologies can enable us to not just have new experiences of presence, but new experiences of presence with each other? Because I think that sense of community is a big factor that we're always talking about in this industry.
Nothing makes me more giddy than being inside of a simulation with somebody that I know.
Right.
We've been doing these things that we call world hopping tours, which is essentially a metaverse tour where we take a group of 10 or 20 people and we go to VR chat and we go to Altspace and we go to Verbella and we try Spatial and we go to Arthur
awesome.
and we go to Glue and we try to knock off as many of these as we can, and we go to spend 15 minutes in each one, and we're hopping on and off of Zoom as we go along because there's lots and lots of friction and not everybody has a dependable connection. Not everybody has the same kind of headset. So you just kind of have to push your way through it. I've got some good technical help from some of my students who are working with me on this project, and we are trying to figure out if we can take corporate groups through this and do these kind of tours as well.
Right. Yeah, no, there's something tangible about the shared nature of the experience, especially when it's with a group of people that you know, a group of people that you actually came together to a specific location with to have that experience.
Right, and that's the most fun. I mean, being with strangers is okay. I've done it both ways. But it's the most fun when you're with your friends and you can talk about it. And that's the analogy to the tour that we do, right? You can talk about it. It's really different. It's an experience. You remember it.
Great. Well, Charlie, before we go, would you like to tell us about your new book?
Remote Collaboration, Virtual Conferences, and the Future of Work was the result of my advanced VR study class at Chapman University in Southern California going into quarantine. Fortunately, the students were allowed to take an Oculus Quest home with them. So now I was teaching VR in VR. And we started to study different platforms for our meetings. So that's the way we spent the rest of the semester. The good news, I mean, there's a lot of good news for the XR industry right now, I have to say, because of the issue of presence. As I said, all of a sudden presence is in short supply and VR is the answer. So again, it's available on Amazon for $15. So please check it out.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Charlie. Really appreciate it. Stay safe and have a great day.
It's a pleasure. I wish you guys continued success. I mean, as I said, there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand when this is over. It's funny because companies have to be closed now, and when they reopen, they may not be able to handle the amount of demand they're going to have.
Well, that does it for another episode of Experience Imagination. I want to thank our panelists, Jason, Saham, and David, and I also want to thank our special guest, Charlie Fink. As always, if you have any questions or comments about today's topic, you can send us an email at podcast@falconscreativegroup.com. Again, that's podcast@falconscreativegroup.com.
This has been Experience Imagination. For more information about this episode's discussion, be sure to visit our blog at falconscreativegroup.com. And don't forget to follow Falcons Creative Group on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram.